You're scrolling, you don't even mean to, but then you see it. Someone your age with a better job, a nicer apartment, a cleaner life. And something shifts inside you. A quiet, uncomfortable weight settles in your chest. It lasts maybe 5 seconds. Then you scroll again, but the feeling stays. That feeling has a name. Psychologists call it social comparison. And it is not a flaw in your personality. It is not weakness. It is one of the oldest, most powerful survival mechanisms your species ever evolved. And right now, in this exact moment of history, it is being turned against you. Here is what almost no one tells you. You were never built to see this many people. For the vast majority of human history, your entire social world consisted of roughly 150 individuals. That number isn't random. British anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent years studying the relationship between primate brain size and social group structure. What he found changed how scientists think about the human mind. The neocortex, the outer layer of your brain responsible for complex thought, appears to have evolved specifically to manage a social group of around 150 people. That is your natural limit. That is the world your brain was built for. In that world, comparison made perfect sense. If you were falling behind your group, if others were eating better, bonding more, rising in status, you needed to know. That knowledge was a survival signal. It told you to adapt. It told you to work harder, form new alliances, change your behavior before it was too late. The discomfort of comparison wasn't a bug. It was the alarm system keeping you alive. But then something happened. Something your ancestors could never have imagined. The screen arrived. Suddenly, your brain, still running the same ancient software, still wired for a tribe of 150, was exposed to the lives of millions. Not just any lives, curated lives, edited lives, the very best moments of an enormous number of strangers packaged into an endless scroll designed by engineers who understood exactly how your comparison instinct worked. And it broke something. In 1954, psychologist Leon Festinger published what became one of the most cited papers in social psychology. His social comparison theory proposed something elegantly simple. Human beings have a fundamental drive to evaluate their own opinions, abilities, and worth, and they do it by looking at others. Festinger wasn't describing vanity, he was describing a cognitive necessity. Your brain cannot assess where you stand in isolation. It needs a reference point. It always has. The problem is that reference point was never meant to be a global highlight reel. There are two directions comparison can pull you. When you look upward at someone who has more, who has achieved more, who appears to be living more, psychologists call this upward social comparison. In small doses, it can motivate. It shows you what is possible. But in chronic, relentless doses, the kind your phone delivers by the minute, it corrodes. It produces what researchers Thomas Musweiler and Katja Reuter identified in a 2003 study as contrast effects. The more you see of others' success, the smaller your own life begins to feel. Not because your life has changed, because the lens through which you see it has. Downward comparison works differently. When you look at someone who has less, who is struggling more, your brain registers a quiet relief, a sense of relative safety. This one is more honest to admit, but it is just as old, just as automatic, and just as hardwired into the social survival machinery your ancestors depended on. The cruelest part of all this is that comparison doesn't stop when you log off. Once the comparison mechanism is activated, your brain begins restructuring how it experiences ordinary moments. A decent salary becomes inadequate when the algorithm has spent a week showing you people who earn more. A fulfilling friendship begins to feel insufficient after an hour of watching strangers with larger social circles laughing in golden light. The benchmark shifts. And because the benchmark shifts constantly, satisfaction becomes structurally impossible. You are chasing a moving target with a brain that was never designed for this pace. Researcher Sherry Cormier, examining what she called the psychology of social media perfectionism, found that the emotional damage of comparison is not primarily about envy. It is about what she termed identity fragmentation, the sense that there is a version of you that is falling short of who you should be, and that this other version is everywhere you look. You are not just comparing your outcomes, you are comparing your entire self. And yet the drive does not stop. It cannot. because it is not a choice. Here is what you need to understand about that weight in your chest. The one that arrived when you saw someone else's life looking more complete than yours. It is ancient. It predates language, it predates agriculture, it predates every civilization your species has ever built. It is the voice of a survival system that kept your ancestors alive long enough to make you possible. It was never meant to be comfortable. Comfort was not the goal, survival was. But there is something your ancestors never had to do that you now must learn to do. They never had to consciously filter their reference group. They never had to decide which comparisons to take seriously. The 150 people around them were real. Their struggles were real. Their achievements were real. Their limitations were real. The playing field was visible, honest, human. What you are navigating now is something entirely without evolutionary precedent. A curated infinity of human experience. A window that shows you only peaks and never valleys, only arrival and never the years of invisible work. Only the version of a life that was selected specifically because it would make you feel the gap between where you are and where you believe you should be. The fact that it affects you is not a character failure. It is evidence that your brain is working exactly as it was designed to. It is scanning for status signals. It is updating your position in the group. It is doing its job. The problem is that the group is now infinite and the signals are manufactured. So what do you do with that? You do what your ancestors did with every other survival mechanism that the modern world had to learn to regulate. You become aware of it. You name it. You give it its context. Not, I am not enough. But my threat detection system has just been triggered by a stimulus it was never evolved to process. That is not a small shift. That is the difference between being ruled by a 300,000-year-old reflex and being informed by it. Tonight, when you catch yourself scrolling and that familiar weight settles in your chest, when someone else's life appears sharper, cleaner, more complete than yours, you will know what that feeling actually is. It is not evidence that you are behind. It is evidence that you are human, that your brain is doing exactly what it learned to do in a world that no longer exists. The ancient survival signal is still firing. You're just finally old enough to know what it is.